All right. So, oh, good.
Sorry, I was trying to make my way through the hallways. It was hard.
So, Andre, this is Beth Hazlett, and
Hi,
she's
Hi,
in
Beth.
2 places. Beth, I'm not sure if Beth was here when you were a student and you graduated in 06.
I was in the middle school. I was teaching in the middle school, yes.
Okay,
And,
we would have missed each other.
And you might remember Tim Brennan, and Beth and Tim are husband and wife.
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
I do remember Tim.
Great.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're recording and we'll just get started. We'll treat it like an interview.
Nice.
Great.
Love it.
All right. So it's about 12:15 a.m. for Andre. So he's doing us a big favor by doing this.
Yeah.
So Andre, why don't you, you saw some of the questions I shared with you, and maybe you could just start by giving us what you're doing right now, a background of what your career is like right now, and then we can get into some of the history behind it and how you ended up there. But we can start with the present tense, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So what I'm doing right now, basically, I'm based in Thailand, and I've been here for about 4 or 5 years, and I'm working as a freelance photojournalist, which basically means I'm covering just about anything that comes up. I work primarily for Bloomberg, also for a bit for a smaller Turkish agency, and the last 2 years have really just been spent covering mostly COVID-related stories, although we did have some protests pop up for about a year, dealing with government reform, and so that was a big part of it. But yeah, so primarily I'm covering like news, small features, occasionally portraits, things like that. And then in the past, I have done other travel stories, as well as like, shooting luxury villas for Airbnb. So all kinds of stuff, really, as well as video too.
Yeah. How did this all get started? Was photography something that was part of your studies formally, or is it something that you picked up informally and just kind of grew and grew?
So I started when I was at UVM, just kind of by accident. A friend of mine worked for the Vermont Cynic, which is like the UVM student publication. And one day she was like, why don't you try taking some sports photographs for us at a soccer game? So I did that and really enjoyed it. And so I stuck around with them doing mostly sports, hockey and other things. And then I don't remember exactly how I got interested in like the more documentary style, but somewhere along the way, someone introduced it to me, and I started seeing images that were much more about storytelling and from all different parts of the world, and that kind of got me interested. And so my senior year, I actually studied abroad for 6 months in Thailand. And I was able to take a photojournalism class there from a young Thai woman who had studied abroad in the States, and she was teaching. And she kind of was able to give me a much broader understanding of what went into the craft, and kind of sent me on some of my first like student assignments to kind of really push myself to go out and meet people and not just to like take pictures, but to get to know who you were taking pictures of and what their lives were like. And it's a bit uncomfortable, that process at first, because you're just sort of inserting yourself into someone else's life and someone you don't know. But she pushed me to do that. And so that was a really fantastic experience. And obviously being in Thailand for the first time was just incredible and overwhelming. And then when I came back, I graduated UVM, and then went to the International Center of Photography in New York City. And they had a year-long, very intensive program covering everything from how to, pitch stories, to finding them, editing, post-production, printing, pretty much everything. And that was pretty much it. I loved it, every minute of it. And then after that, I just knew I wanted to go back to Asia. And I actually ended up in Nepal for a while, about 4 months, which was incredible. A beautiful country, very mysterious and just full of adventure. Unfortunately, it was kind of hard to get work there, so I didn't end up staying for too long. There just isn't a whole lot of like international interest in what's going on there. But that was 2013, so Burma was just opening up to the outside world after about half a century of isolated military rule, and it seemed like a great place to go. So I, with no real plan, went there and ended up staying for 3 years, which was all, I can elaborate a bit more on that in a bit. But after a while, I decided that there was enough of that, and I moved to Thailand, and I've been here ever since.
So what's the time frame for finishing up at UVM and then New York and Nepal and Burma?
So I graduated UVM in 2010, and then I think I graduated ICP in 2012 or 2013. I can't remember if it was 11, 12 or 12, 13, but somewhere in that. And then, yeah, and then I was off to Nepal. So it must have been 11, 12. And then I spent a bit more time around Vermont. And then I went off to Nepal in very early 2013 and stayed there until about June of 2013, at which point I went to Myanmar and started my life there for a bit.
So you were, I'm really fascinated with Burma / Myanmar. Like, what was that like? Were they tumultuous years? Was it kind of a lot happening that drew you to Burma at that time?
Yeah, so like I said, they had been completely isolated for the better part of the last half century, so about 50 years, by the ruling military. So, and I mean like really isolated, like completely cut off from the world. So going to Burma at that time was probably the equivalent of maybe coming to Thailand in like the 1970s or something. So you just like, so if you see pictures of Thailand like the 1970s, like there's still people, it looks very rural. Even Bangkok has a lot of like rural markets and people are out on the streets and there's lots of life. And while that has modernized, when I got to Myanmar in 2013, it was very much like that. I think there was one ATM in the whole city of Yangon, which is like the main city. And there were like, no one had cell phones. I paid $150 for a black market SIM card. And I kept getting really like calls from random people because it was just some guy's SIM card that he had sold on the black market. And they were all really confused because there weren't that many foreigners there. And I would answer in English and they'd just be totally confused because it was so weird for someone to call this number and I would pick up speaking English. Yeah. But yeah, so that time for them, that period from 2013 for like the next 3 years was pretty huge, because in 2015 they had what was their first supposedly free and fair election, democratic election. And being there for that whole time was kind of watching, what might take 10 plus years in another country to happen. This kind of shift from total military rule, this crazy economic boom, other countries coming in and wanting to build and invest, and watching the whole country play catch up, and everyone all of a sudden having a cell phone like 2 years later, and all these companies coming in and wanting to expand, and then leading up to this election, which was huge. You would see elderly women and people lining up to vote, and they had waited their whole lives, you know, just for this one chance to feel like their voices mattered in this election, which was just really, you know, it was incredible to see, and to kind of have a front seat to history and fast forward almost. So it was very incredible, and just to travel around. I mean, I ended up in towns where like they hadn't seen someone, a foreigner, ever, or for decades, you know, like maybe some person had ended up there 20 years ago for some reason, but it was just totally untouched in some ways, which is an experience that you know, you'd be hard pressed to find again, I think.
Yeah.
The downside of that, of course, being that things like food hygiene was very low. So I got, you know, food poisoning was just kind of an expected occurrence for me every couple of months.
Yeah.
And you know, we had like, I didn't have hot water for the first year or so, and it was just a bucket shower, which is basically just like a tank of water, and you just kind of scoop it over yourself to wash. And there were tons of mosquitoes, and I got dengue fever in the first few weeks I was there. It was a real adventure, to say the least.
Sounds like similar to being in the Peace Corps.
Yeah, I've talked to many people who did that, and it was like, for being a main city and so close to a country like Thailand, which has come, so, you know, is very modernized at this point. It was just, you know, an hour flight, and all of a sudden you feel like you're in a different, some sort of parallel universe.
So it sounds like something. What drew you to Burma was just kind of the mystery and just the opportunity to be there at that moment. But how did you develop professionally being in Burma? Was there opportunity for you to work there?
Yeah, there was. And I mean, at that time, because it was so new and it just opened up, I mean, pretty much people were just interested in anything coming out of there. So I was able to people just wanted to buy photographs from Burma, no matter what it was, really.
Yeah.
So that was pretty great. But beyond that, I mean, there was so much going on there all the time. It's hard to describe because most cities aren't like this, but like people, you know, like lived in whole families lived in very small apartments. So people didn't want to be in their homes. So everyone's out on the street all the time. And there's just life everywhere, you know. It's so busy, and so much is happening that photographically, like, you can't really do better.
Yeah.
It just, you take your camera outside and just go crazy, because there's just so much happening, and everyone's was really nice and eager to meet you and talk. And Burma actually has one of the highest literacy rates in Southeast Asia. So a lot of people actually spoke pretty good English. So it was actually quite relatively easy to navigate. So just having that all at your fingertips was really invaluable.
I have a question for you. So in
Sure.
terms of that, being able to sort of capture that energy and that like dichotomy between the sort of like insular nature and then the opening up, were there particular photographs that you took that you felt like really conveyed that?
Yeah, actually, I was going to show one series of photographs that I did there that was kind of special to me. I can talk about it and do that now, or however
Sure.
works best.
Sure.
Should I do a screen share and
That would
pull
be.
it up?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, can everyone?
Yeah.
You're getting that. All right. Just gonna open Bridge here. So, can you see that well enough?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So one of the things that interested me, because everything was happening so fast, and by that I mean like this economic expansion and all of this investment pouring in and all this money, and these buildings were just going up like crazy. Property prices were insane. But I had this interest to go and photograph one of the families who make bricks that were kind of being used for this expansion, and to talk to them, and just they were like an hour outside of the center of the city, and I was curious about how what their experience was with all of this, if they even knew it was happening, how were they affected by it, because it was essentially they were responsible for helping literally build it. And so I went out there to meet them, and I photographed around this brick factory for a while. And I ran into this one family. This is the mother here tossing this brick. And for some reason, I just kind of clicked with them, and I ended up spending the better part of a year going back to visit them and to talk with them and spend time photographing them. And what was really fascinating is that none of the major political or any kind of upheaval that had happened, and there have been some really major protests and clashes in the last 50 years, they didn't know about any of it. Like these very famous, there was a 1988 revolution, and there was another one in 2007 called the Saffron Revolution, which were incredibly violent and very volatile. And for some reason, none of the names even rang a bell for them. So like here they are, like just an hour outside the center of the city, supplying raw materials for, to help this, economic boom. And they were totally removed from any of it. Like they had no idea what was going on, essentially. People had kind of come out to say, oh, here, you can register to vote in the 2015 election, but then never came back. Like they never actually had any opportunity to vote. So it was just, for some reason, I just connected with this spot, and like these people who are very much integral to the, the country moving forward, and yet totally kind of ignored by it. And they had a very hard life, obviously. The father, this is the mother again, and the father who's here on the left, he actually died about halfway through the time that I knew them. He had, I think, suffered a stroke or something at some point much further back before I met them, but he just collapsed one day and died. It was quite devastating even to me, as I come to notice or to get to know them quite well. This
Andre,
was their, sorry.
I'm just going to ask you about communicating with them. Obviously, you've developed language skills. What languages have you learned, and how proficient are you?
Not as proficient as I would like. I did get somewhat comfortable speaking a bit of Burmese, but I usually would work with a friend who could translate, just so that we could cover the finer points and the finer details. And I would usually invite them along, or not, I paid them for their time, but I usually take them like once or twice. And then some days I would just go alone and just photograph, and not talk that much. And that worked out pretty well. I mean, translators, people who help me out that way, are a huge part of what I do in some cases. But especially for something like this, where it's always going to be difficult for me to do it on my own. And it just becomes like someone who's really good at translating too will just kind of, they're very effortless at it, and they're very good with people, and they really help create a nice connection. And it even helps me, because then I can kind of like sit back and just observe and listen and photograph sometimes even. Especially because there will always be a difference. There will always be a skin color difference, an economic background difference, a geographical, where I'm from. There'll always be these massive differences. So anything that can help sort of overcome that and help people be comfortable, at least at first. And so we can, they can ask me any questions they want and things like that. Everything good there with the sound?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. I'll keep going through, but this was their eldest son. And while I'm photographing these stories, you're always looking for like nice human moments too, not just like labor and toil. Things that I felt really showed their lives. And in this picture, especially, this is their oldest son. And he always had a really, really difficult time with the way that his life was, because he would have to give all the money he made to his parents. And he hated that. He felt like he had no freedom. And so I always loved this picture of him swimming, where he seemed like a little bit at peace and like kind of away from everything.
Are you taking these photos in black and white, or are you working with them in Bridge or in other software to present them?
So, everything I shoot is in raw file format, just for archival sake, and also, to have the most leeway when it comes to editing or printing or whatever you might want to do with it. So everything is a conversion to black and white after the fact. But I always, once I started this project, I always wanted to shoot it in black and white. It wasn't like I shot it in color and then I think it looks better in black and white. I always tend to have, at least after a little while, you have kind of a clear vision, of what you want.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Really are.
This was one of my favorite moments. This is the eldest son and their youngest, their middle daughter and their youngest baby. It was really important to make it not look like the children just worked all the time, because they did work a lot, but they also got to play a lot. I didn't want to make it look like a child labor story, which it really wasn't. That can often get pretty easily misconstrued. And like here, he's looking for things he can sell in his off time.
But it really is about maybe not like any kind of forced labor, but it is about subsistence living, right? It's just day-to-day living, survival living.
Absolutely. And even though it's not, like the children aren't forced to work, like they do have to work. And it's very much, it's not indentured servitude, but they do get into a situation where, they weren't, the parents came from a small village along the main Irrawaddy River, some, hours and hours away from Yangon, and you come here for work, and then you start having to borrow money, or you need things, or there's a small fee to get set up or whatever, and one debt turns into another and so on, and it just becomes a case where you're just kind of working off debt most of the time. So it almost is, it's not forced and it's not servitude, indentured servitude, but it's really towing the line there. And once again, just found it really amazing that these people live so close to the center of everything that was happening, were directly involved in supplying the raw materials necessary for the whole economic expansion that followed the country opening up, and yet we're completely outside of, at the same time outside of everything that was happening, and somewhat oblivious to it through no fault of their own. And like I said, we're not, like, no one even followed up with them to let them know how to vote or where to go.
So with regards to like the lack of understanding or the lack of awareness to some of the political ongoings and the value of their vote and the democratic process and all that, is it the same with COVID in this, within the same populations? Is there that lack of awareness with regards to what's happening either within the country or globally with COVID-19?
You mean in Myanmar? In Myanmar, I don't really know because I haven't been back in quite some time. First due to COVID, and then due to the fact that the military is now there. It's a civil war basically.
Mhm.
So I'm not. I have to say I'm not really sure. I would, if I had to guess, I would definitely assume that yes, there is some of that, especially now because operating anything in Myanmar is quite difficult, including any kind of community outreach, because the military is making it so difficult. So yeah, I would have to guess that yes, probably the case.
Is there a project in Thailand that you'd like to show us that is maybe in contrast to the work that you did in Burma?
Yeah, I can definitely show you something from Thailand. I was just going to pull up a short edit that I just entered in a bunch of contests. It's much shorter, but from what I've done last year, which was like this youth protest movement. So Thailand has a long history of protests. They've had a quasi-democratic military ruled government for a long time. It's ultimately a monarchy, but it's always been a topic of protest that people want much more freedom. They want to feel like it's actually a democracy, and they're pretty fed up with the current prime minister. What's different, or what happened differently in the past year or so, is that the protesters were very, very young. Like a lot of them were 18, 19, or younger, even 15, 14. And I even saw a few kids that I were pretty sure about 8-year-olds running around through tear gas. So, and this is the first time in a long time too that the protests had gotten pretty violent, and that Thailand had, or the police had chosen to respond with riot police, with tear gas and rubber bullets and water cannons. And this is a little kind of a different style than the brick factory, because this is just like a series of protests. So this first one of these kids were just reacting to the tear gas in the back. Motorbike protests are extremely popular here, often as a way to keep protest leaders moving, so it makes it a bit harder to arrest them or to figure out where they might go. This is a water cannon, and the water's purple because they mix it with chemicals like agitation that sting and burn and are pretty horrible. This kid's just having like tear gas rinsed out of his eyes. So this is one of the, there's a bunch of different youth protest groups. This is one of them. These kids are the most volatile, to say. They started using like homemade explosives, which they would throw. Actually, shortly after this picture was taken, two kind of official vehicles drove past, and one of the kids out of nowhere threw like a homemade explosive at it, and then like 5 minutes later they like 30 riot police showed up and the kids all had to leave. But this was, yeah, so they were not very popular among a lot of the older protesters, specifically, who are big fans of kind of working with the police, whereas these kids are just like, the heck with that, the police are an arm of the government, we don't like them.
Did that, I have a question about that. Because
Sure.
you had a photograph of them, was that, did you have any difficulty with the police? Like, did they demand that you turn over your camera or do anything like that?
No, I'm accredited media, I'm registered media here. So there wasn't ever a time. The police were actually pretty good about respecting press for the most part. There were a couple times where the police would like try to cut you off and keep you away from the protesters. And then once you ended up behind the police line, they would be like, you can't go back. Like, so they were trying to like stop you from photographing it.
Right.
But there wasn't really any time where they're like, you have to, turn over your memory cards.
Yeah.
The only time that actually ever happened to me was I was at a royalist rally. So these are like monarchy supporters, and the king was going to drive by, and their secret service was like, oh, you can't take any pictures. Give us your cameras. You can use your phone. They were much more worried about pictures getting out that might say something bad about the royal family or be used in some sort of way that casts a negative light on the royal family. The royal family is above all here. So it's like the monarchy is the absolute top. And this was also the first time, and maybe ever, that protesters were calling for monarchy reform as well, which is really huge. And there were a lot of arrests for, like, under Thailand's lèse majesté law, which means basically if you say anything that can be conceived in any way as being against the royal family, you can be arrested. That includes posting online. I mean, it's so broad, and there's been a lot of pushback against that aspect.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question. I may have gone off on a tangent there.
That was great. I actually have one follow-up question.
Sure.
So how have you, when you've arrived in Thailand, how much did you know about their history and about their current politics? How much have you, and where have you sort of picked up things about it, other than obviously talking to people that you're spending time with?
Sure. So back when I studied abroad here in 2009, that was actually right during the start of a really tumultuous protest era between the red shirts and the yellow shirts, which I'm not going to go into a ton because it gets super complicated. But I started picking things up then. So I've had kind of a basic understanding of the protest history here since then. And then, when I moved here, you just kind of get assimilated into it. And it's very deep. There's a lot of symbolism. Thai people are very fond of symbolism and protests, and it's very convoluted, the political situation. So it's just kind of something that you have to absorb over time. And honestly, even like Thai journalists get confused sometimes. It's just because it's all over the place. But yeah, basically it's just being out there and talking to people and being around the whole situation.
Yeah.
And it was actually kind of cool. COVID actually gave me, because I was just here all the time, like I really didn't work in any of the other countries in the region. I kind of got to deep dive into everything that was going on here and meet a lot more local journalists, people I didn't know before, who are really great and who are now really good friends. So that was kind of a blessing in disguise. I was able to kind of get to know where I lived a lot better. But yeah, so as you can see, like, this was one day that was absolutely crazy. This is all like riot police pushing protesters back, tear gas and all that fun stuff. This is a rubber bullet gun, which they started using for a little while.
Is that a camera on his helmet in that previous picture?
Yeah, it's a GoPro, just so they can have I guess it's like but not a budget body cam, but the Thai police version of a body cam, I guess.
Are all these pictures pretty much in Bangkok?
This is all in Bangkok. In fact, it's all mostly right around the same area, which just became, it's called Dindang. It was one intersection that the prime minister lives along the road leading out of the intersection. So the first day the kids tried to march to his house, which is in an army compound, but obviously they didn't want to let them get anywhere near that. So they put up shipping containers and started using like riot control weapons. And then that just became the spot that everybody went to for like several months. For a while, it was almost nightly, like every day from like 4 until whenever. These kids would be out there protesting, and there would be this kind of like back and forth between them and the riot police.
Yeah. Andre, earlier you mentioned about your time in Nepal, and you said that there were some really interesting things happening there, but there wasn't a lot of international interest for those things journalistically, I guess. Do you ever, I guess my question is, maybe obvious, but is it frustrating to you when you're in the thick of things there in Bangkok or or anywhere in Southeast Asia, and you see some big events happening, but know that there might not be kind of an international interest or taste for it? And how does that impact your work?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's all, I mean, one of the main reasons you do this job is so that the pictures can be seen. So yeah, it's tough when that, there's not much interest in what you are showing or would like to show. In Nepal, I think it was just a case of it's just such a small, it's sort of out of the way. But at that time I was just kind of like traveling a little bit more and didn't care as much. I was just happy to be out in the world. Now it's a bit different. I mean, I have a lot more experience now. I understand a bit more the news cycle, what people want to see, what news wires are going to want to see. And I mean, unfortunately, not all of it is really that interesting. Sometimes there's a lot of really boring stuff that's much more business focused or economy focused. But you just kind of have to accept that it's just part of the deal if you want to try and make a living. Unfortunately, we can't be out shooting the exciting travel pieces all the time. There's just not enough of a market. So it's just a matter of, it's just like any job. Some things you do that you're really excited about and you can't wait to get out there and you love the pictures, and then other parts you're kind of like, you just shoot it because that's that makes some money and you got to pay the rent at the end of the day.
I can imagine it can be frustrating if it's something that you think politically is important or impactful, and that maybe in the larger markets in the Western parts of the world, there might not be room or interest in what's happening on the other side of the world.
Yeah. And not only that, but it's that's true of any country too, because except maybe like the US, where you have a lot of main media outlets based. So obviously there's always interest in the US or maybe China. For any country that's not a major world power, it's part of the game. There's just, even if there is interest. So like for example, the protests, there was some interest while they were violent and exciting. But it comes and goes so fast, and you might, people might stay interested in it for a week or 2 weeks, maybe. And then the news cycle moves on to somewhere else. And unfortunately, that's just the way it is. News is foremost in the industry these days. There's been a large shift in the last 10 or 15 years from, people being able to do a lot more focused, longer pieces. And as budgeting, budget has been slashed and newsrooms have been cut, the wires, AFP, Reuters, AP, Getty, Bloomberg, like all of the big wires have taken over. And so most of the news, mostly you're shooting these kind of things where you get like a day here and there for certain things. But they're just not interested in it, spending 2 weeks or whatever. So all of the protest stuff, some of it's commissioned, some of it's on my own just because I wanted to be there. Yeah, but unfortunately, that's just one of the harsher realities of news photography.
Yeah, and it's hard to know, I hear that, like, the sort of news cycle, but it's also hard to know, like, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, will some of these images be still seen, right? Like, like I was with the brick factory, I was really reminded of photographs of sharecroppers, in the
Yeah.
States, right? And
Mhm.
some of those are still actually kind of part of our photographic canon, if you will. So anyway, it's interesting to think about, like, well, what will happen with these photographs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that I kind of wonder the question always going through my head is, are any of these used? Do I need to be here? Are these photographs useful? It's just like, it's a bit of the self-doubt that comes with choosing a profession that's also a passion. You always have these questions on the inside. You're always questioning, what am I doing? Am I doing this correctly?
Right.
And especially when you do end up in a compromising situation, possibly for the people you're photographing. There's a lot of questions that go along with that. Do you have, is this important for you to be doing, or are you just doing it so that you have something to publish? In this constant tug of war that kind of goes on internally. Will these photographs be relevant in the future? I don't know. Some of the protest stuff, absolutely, it could be. I don't know what's going to happen with Thai politics in the future. Maybe there will come a day when, they finally remove the military completely. Maybe there will be huge reform, and maybe these images will be part of history, a big part of Thai history anyways. I don't know.
Yeah.
Stuff from Burma, absolutely. Stuff from the 2015 election, yeah. I think that will always have huge significance. It was a once in a lifetime event for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I think that could definitely have significance going forward.
Yeah.
Hard to say though.
Have
You
you?
never really know.
Yeah, I know. And at some level, like, obviously, like, you have to be in the moment there too, even as those questions kind of roll around in your head. Have you had shows of your work? Have you had an opportunity to bring together, your work over it from multiple locations and over multiple years?
No, I've never had a kind of summary show like that. I've had other exhibitions, but mostly either part of a group exhibition or a specific work. Like the brick factory work, I had a couple of exhibitions of that. But no, I've never done a kind of overall retrospect or something.
Yeah.
Would love to, but
Were those showings of that work in the United States, or were they more online or in Thailand?
Or Burma?
The brick factory was, I did a show, like a local show in Yangon in Burma, and then I also had it shown in Bangkok and a couple of places. And I've been part of some group shows mostly around Asia. Yeah, nothing in the US yet.
It'd be fun to host something here in Woodstock.
Yeah, we could definitely do that someday. That would be fun.
Andre, we have maybe like 10 minutes left, and I want to
Okay.
your time on your end, because
especially since it's late.
It's late. But
Oh, well, now my brain's going, so I'll wake again.
There's two things I still want to ask you, but I want to go kind of back to just like your growth as a photographer, as a photojournalist, what kind of mentors you've had, and how do you go about like building your career, like building relationships with people? And I guess, is it just the school of hard knocks, or is it like is there a certain strategy, or just kind of like experience over time?
Okay, so all right, so mentors is the easy question. I haven't had any long-term mentors, but I have had some really great teachers along the way. I mean, pretty much every teacher I met at ICP was absolutely fantastic. Many of them very accomplished, in the field. And I've had a couple of workshop teachers along the way as well that have all just been like really amazing. And a lot of people that do this job professionally and do well they just tend to be very genuine and open and insightful people. So yeah, having sort of inspiration and help along the way was never an issue. It was always in great abundance. As for how you structure this career, that's very tough. And there's been a major shift, like I said, in the last couple of decades. Most of my teachers they were like, oh, you should just go somewhere and start taking pictures and then try to talk to editors and sell it, and just get recognized. And that's doesn't necessarily work anymore, because there are so many people taking pictures everywhere. We're completely inundated with photography all the time. And it's very difficult to stand out. So for me, it was kind of just, like you say, the school of hard knocks. I just went out and hammered away at it until, finally, people recognize that you're there. And I pitch almost everything I shoot, I pitch to people, so I'm also doing them the favor of being here, of understanding what's going on, and picking up on things that might be interesting, to whoever I'm pitching it to. And it's been difficult. I won't lie about that. Because there at one time you could have gone and intern at a local paper and then maybe got a job there, and then after a few years of that, maybe you get a job with a bigger publication. But that ladder just doesn't really exist anymore. It's extremely rare. There are almost no staff photography jobs left. For whatever reason, those just got cut left and right. And even the publications that do still have staff photographers left over, like the New York Times and these really big publications, they're not hiring new staff photographers. They're not hiring younger staff photographers. There's even staff video jobs more often, I think, than there are staff photography jobs. So yeah, I mean, if whenever I'm talking to people who are thinking about getting into this, I always recommend that if they're really determined to do it, don't just do photography. Right off the bat, start doing video, because it's going to make your life so much easier. And even if you make yourself as much of a package as you can. And alternatively, if you're interested in doing kind of documentary style and you don't care about as much as news, but you just want to do stories, study a related field, study something else interesting that maybe you can find a niche in. Some of the people that I know that are around my age that are doing incredible work have a niche. They studied some sort of science or something, and now they're involved in expeditions in that field that they're interested in as documentary photographers, and that's really cool. So there's 1,000 ways you could go about doing it, but I always recommend that people either really diversify within so video, photo, writing right from the beginning, or that you find another way, find another career and let documentary photography be something that you're just passionate about. And I never try to lead people to believe that it's easy to do it as a career, because it really is not, unfortunately.
So I have a couple questions about some of what you said. So do you ever do you work with a journalist who is writing a news story? Do you ever like team up with someone in that way? Would a news organization ever contact you and say, you know, we want you to be with this journalist and do a photo shoot, do go out and take pictures of whatever the event is, or do you get that kind of work?
Yeah, that happens occasionally, for a variety of different things. However, oftentimes too, they'll just be like, oh, the writer is writing the story, but you go and take the photographs, but you're by yourself. Because the writer will be doing phone interviews or whatever.
Right.
And they won't even go, or they've already written it or whatever.
Right.
So that does happen sometimes.
Yeah.
But I would say the majority of the time I'm pitching, photo things that would be interesting photographically for them to have to, like, oftentimes it's even just like photos that will be applicable to a variety of articles.
Right.
You know, something that they can keep and draw on over time.
Right. And if you were say pitching a particular photojournalistic story, would you typically show some of your previous work if that was a news organization that you hadn't worked with before? Like, would they be interested in seeing your portfolio, or not?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They probably won't buy anything from it,
Yeah.
just because most people are interested in things that are up to date.
Right.
I mean, like by the day. But yeah, I mean, your portfolio is like, you don't have to go to school. You don't have to, whatever. If you have a portfolio, that's your credentials. So pretty much people always want to see that.
Yeah. Well, to wrap things up, I wanted to ask you, what are you excited about right now in terms of what's happening with your work? And if you were pitching, what would you be pitching right now?
So that's a really good question. I wish I had a better answer for you. And I think I even mentioned this to you a little while ago, but things are a bit slow right now. And as we kind of like come out of COVID, not really COVID, whatever's happening with that, it's kind of tough to plan ahead right now, especially because travels throughout the region is still very full of hiccups, and you end up spending time in quarantine in a bunch of places. So I unfortunately don't have anything I'm planning right now. I would have loved to have gone back to Myanmar. Unfortunately, that's no longer an option either, just because it's not safe anymore. For myself, I'm actually starting to get into photo editing, and I've been looking and applying to a couple of positions that would hopefully let me do part-time photo editing and keep shooting, because I'm really interested in that aspect of it as well. But
Photo editing for a publication.
Yeah. And ideally, eventually for a more editorial publication where, we would be working on kind of more in-depth stories and stuff. That would be ideal for me going forward, I think.
Yeah.
But other than that, I mean, I would love for the pandemic to clear up and be able to work in other countries again in Southeast Asia and just move around a bit more. Would be fantastic. It would be a great start.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to talk too much about the pandemic, but in general, how it sounds like it's had an impact on your work. And
yeah.
What do you see happening in Thailand and other parts of Southeast Asia with regards to access to vaccination and the percentage of people who are vaccinated? I imagine that it's drastically different than what we're seeing in the United States.
Yeah, so we actually got really lucky here in Thailand. So when COVID was first announced, that it was happening, we get a huge amount of Chinese New Year visitors coming from China to Thailand to visit family and just go on vacation. So we had thought that there was going to be a massive surge here, and for some reason it never came that first year. I don't know why. People here are very open to wearing masks. It's kind of people just do it when they're sick anyways. So that may have been it, that just like immediate widespread reaction. But overall, we got really lucky for the first year or so. Cases were extremely low here, and there was really almost no cases being recorded at all for a while. And it wasn't until like this past year, when was it? It's all blending together now, but the previous wave they had hit them the hardest. And that's when we kind of ended up doing like the teams moving bodies and that kind of stories and pictures. But Thailand kind of bungled its whole vaccine delivery for a long time. I honestly think they just got lucky with the whole thing, that there weren't that many cases for a long time. And it wasn't until more recently that they started vaccinating seriously. And I think that still only like maybe 65% of the population is fully vaccinated here. And the rest of Southeast Asia has been varied wildly. I think Vietnam handled it very strictly and pretty well. I think Indonesia got hit pretty hard. Myanmar is a mess right now just because of the whole civil war thing. I think people are dying there left and right. And it's just been impossible for them to try, getting oxygen tanks and vaccines and tests out to people has been really difficult. So it's been a whole mixed bag across the region. And we just happen to get really lucky most of the time. Been able to travel a lot with no tourists here, which has been kind of amazing. But yeah, we almost came back to the US I almost came back to the US right at the height of it, just because I thought it was going to be worse here. And then at the last minute decided to stay, and turned out to be the right decision. Basically, yeah, supplied me with a lot of work for a couple of years because everything was of interest globally.
Well, Andre, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
Sorry we didn't have a live audience for you. We're going to continue to brainstorm, but I think we recorded this. It's really going to be valuable to us, and you can boast that you were the first.
All right, sounds good.
By the way, I have to tell you this. Yesterday in the faculty meeting, Luis was announcing that this was happening, and someone said, "Wait, wasn't he the first WUHS?"
Yeah, that's true. That's funny. I can't even. Is that still happening?
No, unfortunately. But apparently
hasn't.
you played the piano. Is that what you did as your talent?
I played the guitar. But
The guitar.
Yeah, that's one of my core memories. That's very vivid.
We haven't done it for a few years now.
It's been a bunch.
I was explaining to my advisory, our homeroom, what that was, and they were like, "Mr. WUHS, what was that?" So anyway,
that was silly.
It was really silly.
It was a good time, good fundraiser.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's cool. Well, thank you so much. It was delightful to meet you. And I definitely we'll put our heads together and try to figure out. I think there's a art teacher. She teaches photography. Unfortunately, it's only digital now. It used to be darkroom photography. Did you take that class when you were here?
I didn't. I had no interest that I knew about in photography in high school at all.
I love it. Anyway, so there is a class now, and I think it would be really interesting for them to hear you speak about your experiences and see some of your photographs. Yeah, so thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
give us a heads up next time you come home.
I will. Hopefully it won't be too far in the future.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks
Yes,
again.
Take care.
I'll see you later.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Lev is in there too. Okay. I've never recorded anything. So
Stop video. No.
it's not stop video.
We're
It was,
go under
oh,
more.
here it
Okay.
is. Look. It's
Okay.
gonna get